On this episode of Doin the Most, my entry in this year's Great Mead Project.
Homemade brews and various how-tos, everything from mead to roast, bake creation, fermentation, inebriation, doing the most.
The Great Mead Project. It's back upon us. We had initially planned to release all these in November, but a lot of us had life get in the way, so the content creators participating this year are releasing their Great Mead Project projects now. Many moons ago, I sent out an email to a bunch of different content creators inviting them to this year's Great Mead Project, and several agreed to join in. So we all hopped on a Zoom and offered up a couple of ingredients that maybe we thought of or our communities thought of, just throwing out ingredient ideas in pairs of twos. And all of those ideas went into a poll, and you voted for the three you wanted to see as part of the Great Mead Project. And you're probably thinking, last year's was so formal. You had an intro, and then you released all the stuff, and then you had an outro video. It was a big thing. Well, a lot of the feedback was that y'all wanted to participate too. So we're making this very open-ended. If you did a Great Mead Project, feel free to post a video about it and send me the link. I'm going to stack links in the description of this video and create a playlist of all the Great Mead projects that are out there. Project. The ingredients that y'all chose, weirdly, were lavender, rose, and vanilla, which to me sounds like what my grandmother smelled like on our way to church. Old lady perfume. And so it was going to be a challenge, especially a challenge to make sure that the honey flavor and aromatics come through when you've got all this soft, flowery stuff at play. Everyone went very different directions. I decided to do a lager braggot using Pilgrimage lager yeast, and so here is what I did. For our grain bill, we had 5 pounds of Pilsen, 12 ounces of acidulated malt, and 1 pound of Carapils. Our hop is going to be East Kent Golding, and we used 1 ounce for a 60-minute boil. At flame out, we put in 3.5 pounds of blueberry blossom honey, and after we cooled that down, we racked it all off onto 5 pounds of rose hips for fermentation. So, as you can see, I did not use rose petals or rose water. I chose the fruit of the rose bush, the rose hip. And then our yeast was Imperial Pilgrimage yeast. I also threw in some glucoamylase and some Lalzyme EXV. The glucoamylase helps the malt dry out in there so we don't have any remaining malt sugars, and the Lalzyme EXV was in there. It is basically a high-powered pectic enzyme to break down the rose hips as best as possible. And then when I kegged it, I added 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract and a half a cup of strong lavender tea. So that's the recipe. Most of this process was waiting because the lager yeast took a while to ferment, and then we had the diacetyl rest, and then a very long lagering phase of several months in a cold climate, in my wine fridge, actually. I'm sure you now have an okay idea of kind of how this went, but it's always fun to show you the full process. So here's how we made this braggot. I started by prepping about 6 gallons of water. Turned on the gas and got that up to mash temp. We're gonna do this brew in a bag style, so I just need to get this up to about 161 degrees. Throw a bag in our bucket, throw our grain mill on top, and get that grain milled up. Once we hit about 161, it's time to drop the bag in, cut the heat, and let that mash for 1 hour. And I stirred occasionally just to make sure everything was mixed around and steeping equally. There's my yeast and all those rose hips. Rose hips came dried, and so my plan was to rehydrate them in the beer wort. After an hour, we pull that bag out and drain everything off. And we salvaged quite a bit of our liquid back, probably in the range of about 5.5 gallons here. And we turn on our gas, get our fire going, and we're gonna do a 1 hour boil of our hops. Hops basket goes in, hops go in, and then we're just gonna boil that for 1 hour. With 15 minutes to go, we put our wort chiller in, so that way we can get it sanitized. and I also threw in 1 Whirlflock tablet. At the hour mark, shut everything off, drain our hops basket, and we will add in our honey because this is a Braggot. We're going to do that with a whirlpool. So just get everything spinning and then slowly drizzle in that honey so it mixes throughout that wort. And we'll make sure we get every last drop in there. Then we're going to turn on our wort chiller and get this thing cooled down to yeast pitching temperature. While that's happening, all those rose hips go into our fermentation bucket. And then we release our wort from the brew kettle into the bucket. Check our gravity, and we're at about 1.056. Then our yeast goes in, and we're using this kind of interesting pilgrimage yeast. That goes right on top, and we're gonna let that ferment. So we put that in the wine fridge, and I fermented it at about 48 degrees Fahrenheit. After fermentation completed, I incrementally raised the temperature of the wine fridge up to 65 degrees and let it sit in there for about a week at 65 so it can do a diacetyl rest so the yeast can consume the remaining diacetyl that's in there so we don't get a buttery beer. Then I racked it off into a clean and sanitized carboy and then brought my temperature down for a lagering phase, which lasted a few months. After lagering was complete, I made some lavender tea with about 1/4 cup of lavender petals and 1/2 cup of water. Let that steep for 30 minutes and then drop that right into the bottom of my keg. I also added 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract. Since we had about 3.5-ish gallons of beer at this point, that meant about a teaspoon of vanilla extract per gallon. And then we racked the beer into the keg, put it under pressure to get it carbonated, and ready for a tasting. So that's been carbonating up for about the last week. Let's jump over to a tasting and see how this rose, lavender, vanilla lager Braggot turned out. So what we have here is from this year's Great Mead project. It is a collaboration with a bunch of other YouTube brewing channels where we all came and we presented to each other in a Zoom meeting 2 ingredients that maybe our communities gave us or we thought of our own fruition. And then we put all those into a poll, and then about 400 people voted in the poll to choose the top 3. Those ingredients ended up being rose, lavender, and vanilla. Yep. Not my favorite challenge to have ever dealt with. And so then we all went our separate ways and made something with those ingredients. What I did was I made a Braggot.
Okay.
And so I used blueberry blossom honey and a very kind of run-of-the-mill lager recipe with just a little bit of hops. And I brewed it as a lager Braggot, meaning it fermented cold. It sat cold for like 3 months in the wine fridge. And the Braggot was fermented on rose hips. So the fruit from the rose bush, not actual rose petals.
So you got to run that just a little bit.
Yeah. Now, rose hips are tart. They're like tart cherry is kind of the flavor. I had no idea what the flavor was. And so I have a feeling we're going to pick up some of that tart fruited beer kind of flavor in here. And then when I put it into the keg, I racked it onto about 1/2 cup of lavender tea, very strong lavender tea, and I put a tablespoon of vanilla in there, which equated to about a teaspoon per gallon of vanilla.
Okay.
My hope being that you get just a little bit of the lavender, some of the smoothness from the vanilla, but really what I want you to have is like a big fruity Braggot.
Okay.
And so the goal here is to determine if this was in any way a success, and then talk about if we can taste the ingredients.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little scared because those 3 ingredients together.
Well, and you don't typically see a a lager this color.
Ultra cloud. Like,
It's a little. So this was crystal clear when it went into the keg, but that lavender tea, I think, really clouded this up.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it was clear, and so it is what it is.
Well,
Cheers. And let's taste a rose hip lavender vanilla Braggot lager. So many things. Yeah, you pick up the lavender on the exhale.
Yeah.
It is there.
I mean, and whenever it first hits your palate, it's not bad. Whenever you exhale, it tastes like soap.
Yeah,
just straight soap.
It's crazy that little amount of lavender tea really comes out on the exhale on this. The vanilla is present. I probably could have done more vanilla.
It exists, but yeah, you can't. It's more like it's a weird thing against like flavor and smooth. Like there's something going on there that you can tell, but it's not forward.
Yeah, this was so crisp going into the keg that it kind of felt like a crime to be putting
Honestly,
lavender and vanilla in it.
I think if you did this without the lavender, I think it would be like a sour, and I think it'd be a palatable sour, like a pretty decent one. That lavender though, man, that's too far.
I've learned over the last year that people are very pro or against lavender. Like, there's not a middle ground. You really have to balance lavender with quite a bit of acid. And this is fairly acidic.
No, it's but the exhale is what's killing me.
Yeah.
Like,
I wouldn't go so far as to call it soapy, but it's definitely...
It's very floral.
It's definitely lavender.
So I kind of put lavender in the same situation as like rosemary, whereas, and maybe I'm just sensitive to both of these. I love rosemary. I can overdo rosemary and get away with it. I can't with lavender, but they're both so pungent that you have to be really careful with it. And I think that maybe the tea, I don't know, man, like maybe the tea was too strong. I don't know.
Yeah, it's steeped for a half an hour, which is a long time, but that's how long I do my lavender soda syrup. So that was the basis that I had.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I would drink a glass of this.
Yeah.
I wouldn't order it for a second glass.
I want to try this again, and I might. I've got some lager yeast in the fridge. I want to try this again without the flowery stuff. Like a rose hip lager.
That would probably be pretty
That's
good.
just like hella crispy and fruity. Like, because I like the tartness because it's not, like you can tell there's like a fruit in there, but it's not like you're getting hit with like cherry or raspberry like you do in some of those fruited sours.
Yeah.
It's just like a subtle tart, kind of little bit puckery, but it enhances the crispness of the lager.
I agree with that for sure. It's just, like I said, maybe I'm just not a lavender guy. I don't know.
I think that these ingredients were not really meant for each other. Lavender, vanilla, and rose. Even cheating and going with rose hips instead of rose petals.
I think your community hates you.
I do want to play more with rose hips.
No, I think the rose hips are probably pretty good. It's the lavender.
Well, thank you for trying it.
For sure.
At least I've got half of a keg of this that I've got to drink or dump.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And thank you to everyone who participated in the Great Mead Project this year. Super awesome. I don't know if we're going to do it again because it feels like the enthusiasm petered out on this one. The world's opened back up, and I guess like COVID hobbies aren't as exciting as they were a year ago. But that's fine. We did it. You voted. Like 400 of you voted, and so I'll consider it a success.
Oh, well, cheers.
Cheers. Happy brewing. Until next time, sayonara.